On a tag team presentation today, so you may hear overlapping. We've been told that there's already some technical problems, whereas if I start talking, you may cut out if Vinny starts talking or vice versa. Apologies, we're going to do it the best we can. I'm James Foster. I've been doing forensic research now for about 7 years. I spoke last year at Black Hat Windows with some forensic stuff. Vinny and I have been doing work now for almost a year, enhancing that talk, so we're really looking forward to this. Anything you want to say about yourself?
Security specialist at a Fortune 100 company. That's about it.
He's prettier than I am. So what we're going to talk about today, right? We've got 4 real things. Avoiding detection. The idea is that in the forensics community, there's really no one pushing the edge with forensics detection anymore. There's no real tools coming out that says, hey, here's how to do anti-forensics techniques. Here's how to back out your stuff. There's a lot of rootkit technology coming out, a lot of good stuff that Greg Holland's doing. But there's no real stuff that the Black Hat community can take advantage of and say, hey, here's new ways to hide stuff. Here's new ways to exploit stuff. Here's new ways to get past the tools that are out there that all the professionals use. So we're going to talk about some of that. We're going to talk about how we broke some of the industry tools. There's a list right there. You'll see vulnerabilities / weaknesses / things that we found in all those tools throughout the presentation. We're going to talk about Metasploit, the new anti-forensics project that is started up with Metasploit. That's actually at Metasploit's website right now. We've got 4 new tools that we're releasing today. They'll be on the Metasploit website as well as the Black Hat website. And then we're going to identify opportunities for improvement and hopefully get us on the bill for Black Hat Japan. Isn't this bad? We've got an opportunity to fix some serious problems here. We found problems within Microsoft Windows NTFS, whereas it breaks most forensics tools in the world. We're going to talk about that. We found a lot of problems with vulnerabilities. We're not just creating them, we're trying to identify vulnerabilities as well. We're not vulnerability researchers by trade, so there's not going to be long advisories. Neither of our companies are in the business of releasing vulnerabilities, so you won't see information like that. You're going to talk about vulnerabilities, weaknesses, and everything in regards to the forensics work we've done. So this will all be tied back into forensics, how you can get past a forensics investigator, how you can get past someone trying to find you, and if you are a forensics investigator, knowing that there are techniques right now that you will have a real problem with when you're trying to track down a new incident. There's no tools that are going to help you tomorrow. So you've got to learn some of the processes.
Definitely one of the things that we'd like to highlight is that there currently is too much dependence on these tools. And as you see this presentation, you'll see that as we highlight the weaknesses that the tools have, you'll see how an examiner who's relying solely on the tools will not be able to accurately complete a forensic investigation. So the format of our talk is going to go as follows. We're going to start out with technique. These are the things that you'll learn in guidance training. These are the things that you'll learn on the streets from other people, from your peers. The next is anti-techniques. Anti-techniques is where we'll cover how to bypass the current forensic techniques that are being taught to examiners, different weaknesses. Where applicable, we'll identify opportunities for improvement, where we see the forensic community could step it up, where they could bring things into their products that would help forensic analysts do their job better. And anything else will follow. Vulns, weaknesses, tools that we've released, and there are a couple things in there.
We're not geniuses. All the stuff that you'll find in today's presentation is pretty straightforward. Outside of the tools and the code that was written, you're not going to see a lot of things jumping shell code around, talking about assembly programming. Most of it is just general weaknesses in Microsoft Windows that we've found in terms of tools that don't support this right now. And most of the heavily regarded industry tools have weaknesses in them that now will be found and be leveraged because of these Windows weaknesses in NTFS.
Temporal locality is our first subject. Forensic examiners love timestamps. Timestamps are important because they help an examiner track down when things have happened. It helps them profile a hacker and understand what the timeline looks like. When did events occur? How did this attack progress through a system? And one thing that they love to do is they like to take a look at these timestamps, look at the MAC attributes, modified access created times on files. Take a look at those, use that as a signature for looking for other files that have been modified around the same time. This helps them locate other suspicious files. The anti-technique to this is obviously to modify the file times, modify log file entries themselves, the times within those records, and also to create bogus and misleading timestamps.
We had a bunch of tools that we released in Black Hat 2004 at the Windows conference up in Seattle. Specifically, two of them called Logs and Pilfer. They were created for the anti-hackers, anti-forensics people of the world to modify log files, corrupt log files on the system, do a bunch of different things for FAT32 systems on Windows. It could corrupt any timestamp on any FAT-based system for Windows. That was huge because at the time there wasn't a file or a tool that could do something along those lines. What we've done since then is leverage that and started to use that along the lines of NTFS as well. They only modified the MAC timestamps for each of these files because they were FAT file systems. And for NTFS, we'll get into the event modified times as well and show you how we can modify those types of situations as well, putting in corrupt timestamps as well as putting in timestamps that have issues with tools.
What we have here is a screenshot from EnCase of a series of file records. It takes a little bit of explaining to understand how the NTFS file system is laid out. Basically, there's a file called the master file table that keeps track of every file on the system. Within each master file table record is a series of attributes that describe the file. What you see there are the 4 columns for modified, accessed, created, and a 4th column that doesn't exist in the FAT file system. This is the entry modified column, and we'll refer to this as MACE. Acme just doesn't sound as cool. So the MACE attributes is what we're trying to go after. And as Foster had mentioned, up to this point, all the tools had basically only focused on the MAC times. So if you think about it, if we use the old tools on NTFS file system and we only modified the first 3 columns, then let's say we take a file that we put on the system today. We make it look like we modify it so that it says, the MAC time say, Wednesday of last week. Well, that 4th column, the entry modified column, is going to be a red flag and say, well, actually the last time I was modified was today. And forensic examiners take advantage of that fact all the time.
So what have we built? The first tool in the new toolkit, called Timestamp, utilizes the following Windows system calls. The great thing about modifying MAC timestamps within any programming language, Perl has a set of APIs that you can leverage and actually change timestamps with just one line of code. Well, that's great. Unfortunately, there's no API, there's no built-in calls for this in other programming languages right now. We can use the Windows system calls, NT query information file, and NT set information file to modify that last event modified timestamp.
What this allows us to do is to pick up where the set file time function call in the standard Win32 API falls off. First thing we're able to do is we're able to look at the MACE values of any file on the system. The second thing that we can do is we can actually set every single value in there. So no longer are we limited to the first 3 columns, but the 4th column as well, the entry modified attribute. And in the process of our research into writing timestamp, we actually found a couple interesting idiosyncrasies with EnCase and Microsoft anti-spyware.
Well,
and our laptop.
there we go.
So this is again a screenshot of EnCase. This is one file that we've pulled out of its preview window. This is a normal file, autoexec.bat. You can see the 4 file timestamps: modified, access, created, entry modified. We can use timestamp to set this file to show anything that we want it to. Now the implications of this are that any examiner looking at a file through EnCase has no idea what the timestamps are now. There's no more red flags. We've completely hidden ourselves from them. And then this is the weakness that we found. We can make it invisible to a forensics examiner what the timestamps are. If you set the time values in the NTFS file system low enough, you won't be able to see anything. And this is what it looks like from the preview point of view.
And now all timestamps are gone. If you're a forensics examiner, how many forensics examiners do we have in here? Anybody that's ever done IR? Anybody that's ever used EnCase or tools like that? All right. As we were talking about earlier, when you're talking about spatial locality, it's important to have these timestamps to try to recreate a system or a pattern of events on the attack. As you can see here, if you blow away all of the timestamps for a certain file, you now have, yes, an anomaly. You say, oh, well, I know that there's been an issue with this. I know that this new tool has been run on it. Well, that's problem number 1. Problem number 2, what if we use recursive? Blow away every timestamp for the whole file system for NTFS. Now you've got nothing to go off of anywhere, and there's no tool that can help you rebuild that.
Microsoft Anti-Spyware, vulnerable to the same problem. This is a screenshot of the Advanced File Analyzer looking at a random file. And this is what we're interested in, modified access created times. If we run timestamp on that tool, on the file, sorry, we get this. It doesn't know how to process the times in the NTFS entries. We're pretty sure that more tools are vulnerable to the same thing, Ncase, Microsoft Anti-Spyware, and others, but we didn't have time to test. It's certainly something that we plan on looking into, though. Here's our first opportunity for improvement. Ncase only uses the MACE values from the standard information attribute. Again, what you see there, the graphic, is an MFT record for a file. Like we said earlier, it consists of a series of attributes. Well, the MACE values are stored in 2 different places. They're stored, one, in the standard information attributes, and they're also stored in the file name attribute. So there's actually 2 sets of MACE values for every file on a system. The difference is that the file name attribute only updates its MACE values when a file is moved or created. The opportunity for improvement we see here is to use the file name attribute MACE values and compare them to validate the standard information attribute MACE values.
However, don't forget about that anti-technique for that opportunity for improvement.
Of course. This is a quick slide of how we would validate the standard information attribute MACE values. Because we know that the MACE values are only updated when a file is created or moved, the file name MACE values must always be older than the standard information attribute MACE values. So the validation technique is to compare the 2. This is what it looks like. If we have a file name MACE, think of this as a timeline. If we have the file name MACE attributes at a certain time, and the standard information attributes are at a later time, we're okay, right? That makes sense. We pass the check. However, if someone tries to set the standard information attributes to a time before the file name MACE values, then we raise red flags. And then the anti-technique that Foster just mentioned.
Think about calculating the offsets from the start of the MFT to a file name MACE value, right? Currently, there are no Windows system calls to leverage this new file name MACE value. However, on some of the new tools we are going to create with the future enhancements, we're going to be able to use raw disk to change those file name MACE values. And now, if we had the ability to change those system MACE values and the file name MACE values, we could push them both back, and you wouldn't have this ability to look at the differences in time creations and the differences between the 2 values. So if it's a file that's not been used for a while, delete the data attribute and fill it with your own data. You can use this kind of situation to cover your tracks again, to fix things.
I should point out that it's actually kind of dicey to perform live changes to the master file table on a live system, but it's something we do plan on implementing in timestamp. That's the only problem with the anti-validation technique.
Maybe you'll see it at Black Hat Japan 2005. Weaknesses in what? Computer Associates, eTrust Audit Suite, plus more. Let's talk about logging. That was the big one. In addition to the timestamps, the logging is some other things we found. Right? Anybody remember STIC being released 4 or 5 years ago? It took down all the intrusion detection systems in the country. Government released an issue about STIC. It had the ability to transmit over 10,000 attacks per second, thereby killing almost every intrusion detection product out there. Well, that's huge, right? Because now, if I can throw out 10,000 attacks per second on the wire, my valid attack's not ever going to get caught. The amount of analysis time required to figure out the valid attacks versus unvalid are almost impossible. So what we've done here is we've got a new suite of tools coming out to do the same type of thing with this new host-based logging tools that have been released. Right, these are huge. A lot of these tools are coming out because of things like Sarbanes-Oxley, these other compliance things that all the CIOs are worried about. They put these tools on there now. Pull back your log files, go through your log files. Well, there's a bunch of new things that we found, right, to exploit these host-based anti-forensic tools. Black Hat Japan 2005. And we have now the ability to write all kinds of log files. There's a whole bunch of Windows commands and APIs that you can leverage that'll put all kinds of things in there. So Vaughan number 1, right? And we're not going to mention any products, but you can utilize your own intelligence from the slide before to figure out what kind of products these are from. A lot of them use text-based signature analysis, very similar to clear text antivirus files or dictionary word searches, right? You can utilize these DAT files. The problem with these text-based signature analyses is the second you put in anything that's not text-based, the engine is going to break. There's multiple tools that we found this so far, whereas if you put in non-ASCII characters, you put in some binary data and throw it right in there to this log file, some of them have constraints about what kind of data you have. If you override that constraint, throw in binary data, when it does that text-based search, you're going to break it. Adding binary data is the easiest way to do it. Overrunning log file limits remotely with known logging techniques is also good. You can utilize special non-ASCII characters to do this type of situation. The other thing that this breaks outside of log file analysis is the tools that utilize remote log file analysis that create streams of data, right? For instance, MSI installer event 11707. You can utilize this event to throw in events easily. Now this is one of those events that goes in your application log in Microsoft Windows Event Viewer. You can call this event from an application when it's done installing. This is how it's been put into the event log system. If you write a program to do something along these lines and it'll actually just replay there and sit there and bang against it, you can throw this file up and over and actually replay and write over the entire log. So that's one of the vulnerabilities that we found within Computer Associates and a few other programs for whatever it's worth. Denial of service. 2 other techniques we found. Most of these programs utilize a Java-based agent. These Java-based agents go out and can reside on just about any operating system out there. You point it at a text-based log file. That log file gets sent back at a period of your selection. It can be 1 minute, it can be 30 seconds, it could be an hour, it could be once a day. Think about the amount of traffic that's created when you have these real-time streams back and forth. 2 things you can do to break this right off the bat. One is increase the log files. Right? You increase log file size remotely by calling system calls, by pushing things that you know are going to be logged. You break this log file, and now your log file system that's actually doing correlation, instead of analyzing 150 lines per second, it's got to do a correlation now in 10,000 lines per second. You're going to break all these log file systems. All these host-based intrusion prevention products and host-based IDSs that utilize logs for correlation are also going to suffer from this. Most analysis engines also use a regular expression engine. So one of the things we found is that we flood the system with log entries and embed regular expressions into the log file entries. Right? Once you start embedding these regular expressions, when the analysis engine pops up and starts running regular expressions on it, it does anything from hold the system, it'll stall the application, it'll put it in an infinite loop and you can't pop out of it, and basically just crashes everything you've got. So look forward to advisories on those in probably 30 days.
Spatial localities are our next topic. Forensic examiners use spatial locality to find tools between systems on multi-system compromises. People tend to store tools in the same directory. For example, the System32 directory, stop using it. Don't use it anymore. It's one of the worst places to go. If any directory is going to be tripwired, it's going to be the System32 directory, so you don't want to put your files in there. The other technique is to rename your files, right? Everyone always says, well, I'm going to rename the file, but you need to do more than that. You need to rename the file. You need to store it in different places on the system. You need to put it in the C drive. You need to put it on different drives. You need to put it in different directories. Do not put all your tools in one place because that makes it easy for examiners to find it. In between systems, don't use the same directories. Again, mix it up even more. Use a spreadsheet and track it if you have to. Well, you might wonder, well, where are we going to put these files? What are good places to hide them? Well, the first place is third-party software. Third-party software is a really great place to hide things because nobody knows what's supposed to be in those directories anyway. Do you know what files come with Adobe Acrobat? I don't. The average forensic examiner is going to know every single file, so put it in there. The other great place is the Microsoft Clipart directory. Microsoft Clipart, last time I checked on my machine, had approximately 26 megabytes of files, about 1,500 of them, ranging in size from 1K to 200K. So if you put stuff in there, you hide the file signature, which we'll show you later on, then it's a perfect place to store your stuff. Browser temporary directories, also a good place. half-downloaded files, broken images, text, binary data, all sorts of stuff.
Thank you.
Microsoft CAD files are a good way to hide your toolkits on the system. Good way to...
Can we break in for a second? If you guys by the door could just walk down to that end of the room, they said they're going to cause a fire hazard and stop the talk if we keep blocking the door. So give you a couple seconds to just move down this way, please.
Oh yeah, also, someone left their glasses during the last talk, so if you're missing a pair of glasses, they're up here on the stage.
Okay, let's keep going. Outside of the CAD files, antivirus, anti-spam, spyware folders, they all have these large files, these DAT files, these text-based files with keywords that'll just about search. Anytime you do keyword searches within case or any kind you do searches on the operating system, these directories are always going to flag with issues, always, right? You get there and you go, oh, well, that's just my antivirus folder, and you just click it off as a false positive. You get that spam folder. Oh, well, that's just where my word list is for my spam. You just click it off as a false positive. Great places to store things and all kinds of files that an anti-forensics person may want to use.
Data recovery. Forensics tools today will make a best effort to recover any files that you've deleted. They'll look through unallocated clusters, they'll look through the recycle bin, they'll look through pretty much anything that it can. What you have to watch out for when you're deleting a file is you want to delete the file name, you want to delete the master file table entry, and you also want to delete the file data itself. You want to wipe all slack space, and you also want to wipe all unallocated space. There are a couple tools that do this. The first one is sysinternals sdelete. Sysinternals makes a great set of tools, freely available. Anyone can download them and use them. Sdelete does a great job deleting just about everything except slack space. It doesn't handle slack space. For slack space, you want to use Eraser by Heidi. That's a great tool. And another tool that's pretty common is PGP Desktop. PGP Desktop has a disk wipe utility that will let you go through and wipe all the unallocated clusters, the free space, and supposedly the file slack. And supposedly, and that's where we ran across our first vulnerability. Well, I guess it's not our first. In the file slack space.
Another vulnerability.
PGP Desktop utilities, I don't know what to call it, a weakness or a vulnerability.
Let's just say that they put, according to the marketing terms, that they wipe slack space completely and they do it in a secure fashion. Actually not true.
The window you see here is a claim that PGP 8.x and 9.1 say it's wiping slack space at the end of files. It doesn't. It doesn't at all. I don't know if it's a weakness, whatever. We'd like to think of it as one of our opportunities for improvement.
The easiest way to the easiest way to verify this too, if you have this utility, is go out and get Ultra Edit, open up your hex editor, and then look to see actually at the end of each of these files if the slack space has been removed, or if it's been zeroed out, or if it's been secure deleted. And you can prove it for yourself.
So in the future, do not use PGP Desktop to securely delete files.
EnCase has two methods for identifying file types, right? These aren't rocket science. You've got the file extensions and file signatures. File signatures are based off of MD5 hash sums or just about any other kind of file hash sum you want to utilize. File extensions, everybody's seen this. JPEG, .zip, super annoying. How many people in here have a Gmail account, right? How many people can't send zip files to their friends in EXEs? Everybody that has a Gmail account. Well, how many people have actually just modified that file extension by one? You know, you've taken it from a .zip to a .zi. You've taken it from a .exe to a .ex. And now that gets past Gmail. Well, you can do things like that as well. Our ANSI technique. Change the file extension like we said. You can do that with Microsoft Windows DOS. You can also do changing the file signatures with off by one. Open it up in Ultra Edit and just change one byte in there. It shouldn't change the EXE. We've changed EXEs in here. It creates a new file hash sum, and
this is how you do it. What you see here is another screenshot from EnCase. First one is the signature. Second one is the hash value. You see two files, sdelete and sdelete modify.exe. File extensions are exe for both of them, and they've both been recognized as the Windows executable file type. Well, what we can do is open it up in Ultra Edit. You can see this is probably the worst slide we have in here because it's a bit confusing, but where the blue's highlighted, you open it up, you see the P executable header. MZ is the signature for it. What do? We modify it by one. We change it to AZ. What happens is, when we rerun encase on it, and we try to see the output for it, at the same time we've modified the file extension. There's the original file, sdelete.exe. It's an executable, Windows executable. With a simple 1-byte modification and a file extension rename, what happens is the signature becomes unknown. It has no idea what the file is anymore. This can also be done in the reverse.
So the great thing about this is you're not actually removing the file, you're not changing the file will still completely work, but no longer will it be able to be found on the blacklists or the whitelists for a file hashing search utility. Right? If I've got 1,000 files which I know are bad Trojans, whether I'm an antivirus company, an anti-spam company, a spyware, I look at these hashes, I do hash comparisons. You figure out if it has that same hash comparison. If it does not, then you move on. It has no longer now listing on any of these blacklists, still completely works, still is on your hard drive.
This is another example of how we can fool file signaturing. This is a text file. Open it up in Notepad. All we have in there is text. What does Encase think it is? Encase says textfile.txt is a text extension. File type is text signature match. What do we do to it? We change the file extension to exe. Now we're moving in the reverse. We want to make it look like something instead of making it unknown. We throw the MZ characters in the very beginning of the file. Still a text file, nothing's changed except the file extension, and we've added 2 bytes. Survey says it's an exe.
Now we're seeing why this could be a problem if you're a forensics examiner.
Part of the Mafia toolkit, the Metasploit anti-forensics investigation arsenal, is Transmogrify. This was a tool that we've written to do all the work for you, basically, so you can switch between different file types however you want, whenever you want, as often as you'd like.
Just to elaborate on the Transmogrify, you can specify the file types you want. We've got in built-in libraries to do this type of thing for you, so you can basically corrupt an entire hard drive now with just a modification at 2 bytes, whereas the hard drive would still work as normal in most cases. However, from a forensic standpoint, you'd have no file searching or hash searching capabilities at all. Tricking the software technique, select text-based logs to analyze, right? Modify all text-based logs to executables or DLLs, and now the entire logging system is broken. So to go back to the logging system as well as this in the forensics world, you always want to pull up these logs. You're going to do file searches. You're going to look at events in these logs. But now, let's just forget about this and say, I can't find logs. If I'm doing file searches, you don't know where they are, because now they're not there as the event files anymore. They've been changed to executables. When you do that search, the log files are gone. The system will hang and not be able to override with internal controls to analyze these files. So remote systems that do log file analysis, such as some of these computer associates programs, you've got these configurations in there where you select on the file that you'd like, and it pulls this log every 1 minute. Well, you're not changing the log. You change one of these 2 bytes in the log. You change the file extension, and now it tries to grab that log again, says it's not there, looks for the closest thing, grabs this new transmogrified file, and hangs the system, not knowing what it is, not knowing how to handle it, breaks it. Now you have no log file analysis. Now this idea of remote forensics is really going to become a tough challenge.
Hashing. Hashing is used by forensics examiners in nearly every single investigation. What they do is they take every file on a system and they take an MD5 sum of it. This creates a unique fingerprint. These fingerprints are compared against good lists and bad lists. Good lists are files that they know they can exclude from their investigation. Reduces the scope. You take a standard installation of Windows 2000, you signature every single file on there. You know those files are good. You compare it against the system that you're analyzing. We can get rid of all those files. They're okay. They're also compared against a bad list of files. These bad lists of files are things like rootkits, Trojans, viruses, whatever. Again, to maybe identify more quickly any files that are definitely malicious.
I'm sorry.
The anti-technique to this is to obviously avoid the common system directories, because a file will pop up during a hash search as being out of place. Another technique is to modify and recompile to change the MD5 sum. What this means is, basically a great way to do it is remove usage information from a tool that you're using. If you have the source to it, just get rid of the usage information. You know what it does, you know how to run it, but it changes the file signature, and it basically takes you off any known good and known bad lists. Stego works, and also this next technique that we're going to demo is direct binary modification. It's another one-byte modification that's very, very easy to do. This screenshot here is sdelete.exe, actually. Again, we have the PE header up here. What you're looking at is probably something you've all seen. This program cannot be run in DOS mode. I'm sure we've run into that every now and then. The one-byte modification that we make to, well, actually, let's get the hash of it first. That's the hash value. Remember, we're looking to change the hash value, keep the file still executable. So what do? Well, we modify the header so that it says this program cannot be run on DOS mode.
And
Does the file, the MD5 sum change? Yes, it does. The file can still execute, and we've hidden ourselves from any hash.
We've talked about this a little. We're going to spend about another 5 seconds on it. Keyword searching. Analysts build lists of keywords and search through files, slack space, unallocated space, memory, deleted memory. If you've got good enough tools out there, you can actually go back and look at deleted memory, look at things that have just been deleted from the directory tables. Obviously, the ANDI technique, exploit the examiner's language of skill. Right? If you know a second language, use all things in your own second language. Very few tools and examiners use things outside of North American English. Other things, great and nearly impossible to catch, is building tools that will actually hide keyword numbers, letters, words in other files. Right? If you suspect somebody of child pornography in your company, you're going to go through a series of things like sex. You can take sex, put that in every file. You can hide it in slack space on the end of every file. You can hide it in all the dead memory space. And now you're going to come back, instead of 7 or 8, you're going to come back with 50,000 things on that computer or 100,000 things on that computer. Again, forensics is all about a budget of time and money. Forensics examiners cost a lot of money to come out and be on site instantly. If you come out and say, I've got these 7 things you need to look at, fine, you can do that in a day. You come out and you say, I've got 100,000 things you got to look at. Now, your management has to sit there and think for just a half a second. Is it cheaper for us to rebuild and just throw this away? Is it cheaper for us to just say, forget about it? Now we found what's happened this time and the consequences and just move on. So you really have to try to cover up your tracks and make it as difficult for the investigator as possible in some cases.
The opportunity for improvement that we see here is for forensic software companies to provide predefined lists of keywords that they can use. I mean, it's expensive to take a long list of words and have it translated into multiple languages. If there's some way they could provide this for free as part of their software, or if there's some sort of community that trades these type of keyword lists, that would be a definite benefit.
Google, thank you.
Reverse engineering. In any investigation, almost any investigation, will run across malicious files, and these malicious files will have to be analyzed. Most examiners have only rudimentary malware analysis skills. This is basically the 3 steps that they go through. They run a tool like PEID to understand the compressor that's been used on it, and then they use any commonly available decompressors to unpack it. Finally, they run bin text on it to look at any strings to look for usage information or any clues that might give away what the file actually does. In some cases, behavioral analysis will be performed on it, but again, it depends on the skill level of the examiner. The anti-technique to this is obviously to use packers to prevent strings from bin text, things like strings and bin text from getting any information out of the file. There is a tool, Packer PECompact2, that allows you to create custom loaders. Also very useful, the best way to protect a binary file. And at the same time, there's a strategy to packing, and there's a lot to it, but it basically boils down to not packing pointless tools. There's no need to pack a commonly available tool. It just allows the examiner to profile you, to recognize. When you pack something, you create a unique MD5 sum, a unique fingerprint. And when you do that, they profile you based on 2 things. Number 1, the type of packer that you use, because hackers tend to use the same packer across multiple binary files. The second thing that they use is to track you down is the MD5 fingerprint of that file. It creates something unique. One of the worst things that I've ever seen in an investigation is as hackers uploading ipconfig.exe or tftp.exe and then packing it and then moving across different systems. That creates multiple signatures that we were able to track down and figure out which systems these hackers had hit. So there are certain strategies that you want to use when you're packing your files.
Profiling. It's a very common thing when a forensic examiner comes in, outside of the fact that you want to prove that you are doing something, to profile commonalities between tools, right? Exactly what we were just talking about. Oh, well, the hacker did this. There's no investigation in the world where management hires you and you walk in and they say, okay, what happened? How far did he get? What did he do? What's to the extent of the hack, right? Show me commonalities. What tools did he use? What vulnerabilities were out there did he exploit? Did he use toolkits, packers, certain language things that you've noticed between the languages, location of these files, timestamps, usage info. So anti-technique, use it's already in the environment, right? If you're in a Windows-based environment, why upload TFTP or FTP to transfer files back and forth? You've got the Windows file sharing capability built right in. No reason to pull in new files. Also, you can leave little things for, I think we took that out. Anyways, you can leave little things for investigators to find, right? You can put things out there, exploits, very commonly available exploits, and just start throwing them places. So that way the forensics examiner gets it, oh, well, this is what he used to get in. No idea if that's what he used to get in or not, because you've messed all the timestamps up. You have no idea what logs he's modified. So you put things in there that makes it low-hanging fruit. He goes, oh, now I get it. He used this exploit to get in. He modified this one file, and he bounced to this system. Whereas, that's the tracks we left for him purposefully. He has no real evidence to go off of. We've corrupted all the evidence that he could have gone off of. And now, he's just stuck with what we've left to give him to say, here's what I've come up with.
And the way the incident response goes, I mean, most of the time it's 3 o'clock in the morning and the forensics examiner is sitting there hunched over a laptop. And the last thing he wants to do is stay there and figure out exactly what happened. What he's looking for is the first thing that comes to him, the low-hanging fruit. So if you feed them what they're looking for, then it's easy to get rid of them. And you slip by on the machines that really matter to you.
Go ahead.
Hiding in memory. EnCase Enterprise allows the examiner to see a number of things. It's a great tool. It captures everything that you need it to capture. Processes, open ports, the file system. The file system is the most important thing out of any forensic examination. It's where everything happens post-mortem. Well, what do you want to do? You want to avoid hitting disk. You never want to hit the disk. If you never hit disk, you'll never get captured.
A couple little things you should know about this too. How many people in here are familiar with Metasploit and the Metasploit project? Right? Fantastic. If you ask a good question about anything from here on out, we've got 4 books we've got to give away from Singris. So very good stuff, and I think you could buy Singris books right outside this door right now. So, anti-technique. Metasploit's Meterpreter, right? You never hit the disk. It's memory resident. That's the first thing. If you've got EnCase Enterprise Edition right now, you can see these open process, open ports, file system. Using something like Metasploit Meterpreter with our last tool that we built and we're going to showcase, it's going to break all current forensics trends right now. There's no concept of hitting disk. There's no concept of leveraging the registry, leveraging file access, or anything along those lines. Opportunity for what's improvement. Capture what's in memory, right? Capture stuff in memory. Don't capture what happened before. Capture what's in memory right now happening. This is a huge thing right now in terms of the worms that are out there, right? Worms, there's memory resident worms and these memory resident exploits. I pop a vulnerability with an exploit, it stays in memory, and it's going to reside in memory until you reboot the computer. Great. At first, when that first came out, there was a lot of tools out there that were struggling to find this memory resident program. So now the idea is, can we hide anti-forensics tools in memory? Can we hide it there in memory? And then if so, if I'm a forensics examiner, and you don't want to take down the system, you don't want to change its state at all, how do I find it? So, yes.
We are actually going to get, the question was, do the current tools out there currently search through the slack space of a drive? The answer is yes. A tool like EnCase.
Swap space.
Oh, swap space. Yeah, they do. They do, and it's a common technique that's used.
Yep. Good question.
Again, though, what that means is page file dots. Well, do you want to get my book?
Yeah, you can get a book later. Let's talk about
Come back later for a book. Actually, before we move on, I want to speak to that. you can actually prevent yourself from being swapped to disk. Pagefile.sys, just because you're in memory doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be in pagefile.sys. You can actually prevent yourself from being swapped to disk. So there are ways to avoid that. There was another question, gentleman on the right.
I'm just going to comment that a lot of the LibOS type CDs have the same type of general protectiveness built into them. That you run blind in memory, there's nothing left. There's nothing left. They're complete compromised toolkits, CDs all run in memory. You pull it out, you go back to what the thing was beforehand, no tracks.
Correct.
Right on. There was another question?
What if you're going to make a machine hibernate? Can you search through its memory image that?
Yes. Good question. We're not going to take any more questions right now.
Sorry.
It's really
Yeah.
breaking our train of thought in the presentation, but you guys get books. Thank you.
So, oh, yeah, alternate data streams. That's awesome. Yeah, we'll get to alternate data streams. That's the latest and greatest. If you look through any slides in the last 3 years of forensic presentations, alternate data streams, the NTFS best way to hide files. Not anymore. Not in a few slides. Our next tool, SAM Juicer. Think of it as PWDump on crack. The idea is that we built it from the ground up. It is no longer based on old code. The problem with PWDump is that it was a proof of concept, but people for some reason just kept on building on it and kept on adding to it, version 2, 3. I've even seen a version 4 out now.
And we're not trying to say Todd Saban didn't do a great job writing PWDump, because it does exactly what it was meant to do. And now we're going to go back to the Black Hat community and say, hey, we're going to extend upon this and give you a new version now that's memory resident.
So this is why PWDump should not be used, because the first thing that happens is it creates a remote share to a machine. After it creates the remote share, it copies over 2 files, pwservice.exe and lsa.ext.dll. These 2 files are used to start a service on the system. The service then takes the DLL, injects it into running memory into the LSAS process, and then the LSAS process will actually capture all the data, all the SAM files, send it right back down to the registry, so it hits registry as well, and then finally it creates a remote registry connection to pull the data right back off. And anyone who looks at the code would realize this, but I don't really think anyone has.
Right. And like I said, the problem wasn't that it was bad code, because it's not bad code. It's that the goal wasn't to be used during an intrusion. Right? If you're a hacker and you're breaking into something, it wasn't like you were trying to use this and be stealthy, because obviously you're not going to be stealthy. Now.
Oh, and it fails a lot of the time. It leaves behind the files, so that's also not stealthy.
SAM Juicer.
SAM Juicer is great because the first thing it does is, after you've exploited a system and you've used the Meterpreter payload, we can slide over our SAM Juicer DLL on the Meterpreter channel. A lot of times using the same channel that we exploited it on. The second thing that it does is it does a direct memory injection into the process. Instead of doing a DLL injection, starting a service, loading the DLL, we don't start any processes. We just create one thread. Never hits disk, never hits the registry, and then when you're all done collecting your data, it slides right back out. Never starts a service, and it slides right back out on the same channel.
Very quiet, very stealthy, memory resident, incredibly hard, incredibly difficult to see what happened, incredibly hard to trace your tracks after you've gone, right?
And when it fails, there's no
Doesn't
evidence.
leave evidence. Memory's wiped. Go ahead.
So, somebody asked about alternate data streams. Well, alternate data streams is like 6 years ago. Pretty much in any presentation out there, you see it touted. You see people talk about it. Every single presentation out there has a demo of alternate data streams. But then we noticed that for some reason, they only paid lip service to SlackSpace. The only thing that anyone ever said about SlackSpace was, oh, you can keyword search in SlackSpace. Well, not anymore, baby. What we're doing is we're taking advantage of a, actually, probably last slide. We should point out what we're doing with Slacker, which is the next tool that we're going to talk about. Slacker basically takes a file, splits it up, and hides it in SlackSpace. What we're doing is we're taking advantage of an implementation idiosyncrasy in NTFS that we found in our research. Basically, if we move the file pointers when reading and writing to the file, NTFS will not zero out our data as it tries to do.
It's incredibly difficult to detect. Because most of the file searching, even if you're doing searching in Slack space memory, you're not going to see a full string in certain cases. We're splitting it up over across multiple files and storing it in Slack space, which means that on any given day, if I split it up over 2 files versus 5 files versus 1 file, the searches are going to be different. The splitting is going to be different. You could hide anything. You could hide an executable. You could hide a text file with your notes that you took on the system. You could hide just about any type of file you want, split over just about any kind of directory structure, file structure that you want.
So what we're looking at here is a standard file, how it's set up. We have 8 sectors here, which is 1 cluster. Each sector we're assuming to be 512 bytes. We have a valid data section. This is where your standard file keeps its information. At the end of every file, we also have a Slack space section. In addition, there are 2 pointers that Windows uses, the end of valid data pointer and the end of file pointer that you're all familiar with. Now, whenever you open up a file to read and write from it, there is the file pointer that you use. Now, how do we actually write to Slack space? This is our file again. The first thing we do is we write file. What that does is appends our data to the end of the file. But if we do that and we save it, then all our data is still there. It's visible. It's part of the file. It changes the MD5 sum. We don't want that. We want to hide it in Slack space. So what do? We move the file pointer with set file pointer back to where the original end of file was. And then we call set end of data. What set end of data does is moves the end of file pointers back to the original point. And there we have our original file with our data in Slack space. This is where the problem is. The problem is that NTFS, when you call set end of data, attempts to zero out
everything that was in Slack space. So everything in the red right now would go to zeros, or so we thought and so we said. The great thing about this is, what we found out through our research is the Slack space at the end, it only zeroes out up until the last sector that it started. So it doesn't zero out everything. This is the finding. It'll zero out that last sector up until the end of that last sector, giving us a full sector to work with and store different types of data in for file splitting. When we're trying to hide executables, text files, or just about anything else. Right?
That agreed? We'll take a question. Why not?
Yeah.
Yes, it will. It will, but there are ways around that. There's 2 things that we can do. We can have a redundancy in our Slack space. We can store the same data in multiple places on the drive within different Slack spaces. And we can also do intelligent Slack space selection. Intelligent Slack space selection being basically canvassing the drive, finding those files with the oldest, last modified times. A lot of files will not change. For example, the Windows DLLs until the Service Pack upgrade is installed on the system. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to show you Slacker in action, a live demo.
Let's talk about, you get this up. Slacker, if you look at the usage menu, hopefully everybody can see this, takes 4 different parameters in, right? It takes the source file, the target directory, the metadata file, and the output file. Each of these is shown up here. You've got 2 ways to run it. You've got a way to store a file in Slack space memory by splitting it up wherever you'd like, and you also have a way to retrieve it. So the thing you can't do in here is you can't execute this so far from our tool within Slack space memory. You can't just point it at something you've stored and say, execute this after you've rebuilt it back together. But okay, yes, that is a very good feature, and it is a very good idea. Obviously, the first thing you're going to want to do is store a file in Slack space memory and split it up. So
what we're going to do is we're going to actually run Slacker for you. And these are the different parameters that we are going to pass to it. The first one is sourcefile.txt. That's the file that we want to actually store. That's located on the C drive. And then where are we going to store it? We're going to store it in C drive hide directory. And finally, if we're going to be storing this data in all these different files, we need some way of keeping track of it. So what we do is we keep track of the data in a file structure, and we take that structure and we actually store it in the Slack space of another file. And that's the third parameter that we pass to it. Just to prove that we're not full of it, we've started up Ncase, and we've opened it up on the C hide directory. That's basically contains a bunch of Microsoft clip art files that I pulled in there, and we can examine the slack space of these files. A bunch of junk data, nothing that you'd really recognize, right? Same is true pretty much across the board. So we run Slacker. Oh, God. Oh, wait.
Put the slash.
I know what it is. So we run Slacker. Phew. Demos are hell.
That could have been bad.
And we see the information. We see that source file.txt. It's the file name length is 18 bytes. The file size is 11 clusters, it looks like. And the XOR key, we obviously didn't use anything, so we can see it in slack space. But the number of victim files used is 4. The next entries are the files that we used, AG0004, 11, 21, and 37. And we see the different file sizes that we keep track of and the use sectors in them. So what we do now,
Open backup Ncase.
and we acquire the drive because we want to see that our data has been stored. So the first file we want to take a look at is AG000004. This was the first file, and remember we just saw a bunch of junk data in there. And there we go. There's our file in slack space.
Yeah.
What do you do to protect your metadata? Because if you read a signature of your metadata or something like that, then you can recover the files.
Absolutely, and that's where the XOR key stuff comes in.
Yeah.
One thing that we plan on doing in the future is using one-time pads, a variation on one-time pads, mathematically unbreakable encryption to obfuscate our data. What that requires is coming up with a stream of ones and zeros that matches the size of our data. So if we have 2K of data to store, we need a random 2K string of ones and zeros. Well, we don't really want to generate those ones and zeros. We don't want to have to remember those ones and zeros. So we sat around, thought about it, and said, well, why don't we take the first 2K of ones and zeros from, say, notepad.exe. We'll use that as our XOR key. It's easy to remember, and it makes our data completely undetectable.
Good question. You get the last book. Can you say that again, please?
No, it does not. The question was, does appending all this data into the slack space change the MD5 sum of a file? No, it does not. Not at all.
No, and that's the whole key for putting it in slack space memory and hiding it in different slack spaces for different files is because A, it's hard to search for, and B, you're not actually changing any of the file checksums. So if you did a file search, nothing would come up out of the norm. So things that you're going to see from us in the future, that was the Slacker tool. We're going to the application layer with this, and as technology progresses, as everybody's seen, application security is the new hot thing. And looking at forensics capabilities and forensics problems from the application layer is going to be where we're going to take this stuff. Now we've gone through the operating system layer, looked at how to put things in file and memory. We're going to look at how old IDS techniques are being resurfaced. We're going to look at different HTTP layer attacks and figure out how to get past them, how to work past the IDS systems at the network layer. Hopefully we'll get some more involvement in this.
This is an overview of what we've covered so far in the presentation.
What we've defeated today.
Temporal locality. We showed you how to modify timestamps with the timestamp tool. Spatial locality, we told you how to avoid being detected. Data recovery, we showed you a vulnerability in PGP desktop, and we told you what tools to use to avoid being recovered. File signatures, easy to do.
File hashing, obviously looked at that from multiple different angles. Keywords, showed you how to get off the blacklist, how to get off the whitelist, get past any of the keyword searches. Reverse engineering, we've looked at that. Profiling, we've looked at profiling from the standpoint of, okay, if you are in there and you start doing things, you want to make sure you cover up your tracks. Effectiveness, information overload, people only have so much time, right? Put tons of information in the logs. 100,000 events is much more difficult to go through than 10,000 events versus 100 events.
Disk accesses, hiding in memory, the SAM juicer tool, different ways of never hitting disk and avoiding being post-mortem collected by a forensics examiner. Got a lot of tools that came out, Slacker, hopefully being one of them. Hope you guys like that one. And also a bunch of software.
So what we're going to do, zip it up, zip it out. It'll be up on the Metasploit new project page later today or tomorrow. It'll be up on blackhat.com in a zip file. You'll get all the new tools. You'll get the updated slides, advisories, exploit code, slides, weaknesses, things like that.
And now, questions. In the corner.
Tripwire?
I haven't tested against Tripwire, but to my understanding, Tripwire works based on MD5 sums.
In an already deleted file?
No, currently no, you cannot, because there's no master file table record entry for it. Right. Yes. Yeah, there are certain calls that you can make to lock your pages in memory and never hit disk. I think it's a system call.
Yeah, and that's actually just an enhancement based off of exporting something and then throwing all of your shell code and all of your exploit code right into memory as opposed to hitting the disk. Yeah.
Nothing changes. And I'm sorry, they do change, but you can always set them back with timestamp. So.
That was the problem. That's why the tools were written together, so you can use them together. All right, looks like everybody's moving. We'll take 2 more questions and come on up if you want to ask more.
Yeah, thanks guys for coming out today.
Thanks.